Welcome to another Artis Opus video. Today we are doing something very different. I have painted this so far using a plastic bag, believe it or not. We're using some wet on wet traditional art techniques. It's turned out quite well. I am going to try tinting that, so fingers crossed that hope that goes well. I've recorded this now just in case I completely screw everything up, but it should work out pretty nicely. So the principles that we are working with are using drying retarder, but you could use glaze medium or lamian medium or any medium, basically, just something that slows down the drying process of paint without adding unwanted other properties. And we're using a scrunched up plastic bag or some baking paper, which is the same stuff that a lot of people have for wet palettes. If you've got that kicking around, it's just some non-absorbent, crinkleable substance that's thin enough for you to ball up, and then we're stippling it on kind of very, very traditional old art style. It's a bit of a weird one, but the final technique is pretty cool, and especially for, you know, like Eldar or alien-esque things, there's some applications. There's also some applications for using it to apply camouflage. So I did a load of tests beforehand, and they went quite well. Right, that's enough talking. Let's jump in. It is quite a fun technique. It's not very controllable, so let's see how it goes. On our palette, I have a load of things that you've seen plenty of times before: Vallejo Game Air Silver, Vallejo 950 Matte Black. This isn't Huldra Blue, it's deep blue, but it is from scale 75. And then importantly, and that we haven't seen before, I've got retarder medium. So this slows down the drying process of paint. Now, this technique started off as an experiment for me. I am going to be using a lot of water as well. This technique started off as an experiment for me, and I really want to encourage people to experiment with this type of stuff themselves as well. So, you know, if you were to mix varnish in, that would probably have a certain effect on this as far as the paint job goes, or, you know, numerous other things. Using thinner in there, I think probably isn't a bad bet, because it will make the paint more thin, and one of the risks of the technique, like any texture-based technique, like dry brushing indeed, is that you build up more texture than you wanted. There is also the risk using that silver that whatever you do, however much black you put in, it gets completely overpowered. Essentially, I want to be able to transition from a super deep, just about metallic blue tinted metal, which have a nice one up there, to a brighter silver at other points. So I'm not trying to put down this paint is thick, but I'm not trying to put down a thick layer of it. Most importantly, I want to put down enough that it's not going to dry out before I've finished base coating. That's the really important thing. It's not the end of the world if a couple of sections do, but it will have an effect on your paint job. You want to be going on top of wet paint. I am working quickly and get some of my retarder medium, some of my silver. Speed is definitely of the essence here. Essentially, you want to get them to the same physical consistency as your other paint. Now I'm going to take some plastic bag, scrumple it up hard, dip it in a little bit of water first to help what I'm making exit, and then you just got to be brave. Test it on your palette. Maybe remove some of the excess. Trying to use a light touch. And now we get to the point where you can be a little bit more chilled and gentle, because we're not so worried about time. I want this to be really, really bright at the front. And it gets to a certain point, and you just basically got to leave it there. So we've got that kind of cool marbling going on. I am going to blow this a little. So there's a couple of things. It helps pop bubbles, and it also helps things merge together. But I am cool with that effect, and that is a really good base for us to do a number of kind of transparency techniques over. Now, I've just noticed that towards the back, there's a couple of sections that I've missed, so you don't want anywhere to look conspicuously untouched, basically, in how I'm going for it. I'm going for a gradual front to back fade, but mostly it's just important that it looks a bit crazy. Okay, so as I mentioned, one of the potential flaws of the technique is it building up unwarranted or unwanted texture. So what I'm doing here, I'm pretty sure this is just really high in water percentage in this section. So it'll probably be okay, but we're better safe than sorry, and there's no downside. I am going to be panel lining this, so, you know, removing things or diluting the technique in the recesses isn't necessarily a negative for me. So I'm just going to go around and carefully, because I don't want to touch anywhere where I touch this crazy organic blooming effect that we've got with this brush. There's a really high likelihood that I ruin things, so I'm using a soft touch with this, and it's just areas that I want to remove. If things are wet, I wouldn't be nearly as worried, because I could go in and I could carry on putting that technique down, but that's about as far as I'm willing to go. I'm just, I really don't want to ruin the technique because it's come out quite well. Well, we can clearly see the benefits of this as a camouflage technique. That was, I swear that wasn't on purpose. So what I'm going to do now is just put down some quick panel lines to help this pop. Top tip here, I sprayed this model with varnish before I did this panel lining, so that is why it is going so fast. I didn't suddenly get, you know, some dexterity boost. I'm trying to keep it in the lines, but a quick swipe with a wet finger, has to be a finger, can't be something absorbent. It will pull it out of the recesses, so don't try using a cloth or something like that. Unless you've got some secret tech that I don't know about, you're far better off using a finger. It's more tactile, more controllable, and it can leave the stuff in the recesses and pull the stuff off the raised areas. I'm always going on about how useful a texture palette is for testing, and that's not just for dry brushing. So I've got some Inktense green, got some Inktense blue. These are scale 75, but any strong inks you have, or even, you know, contrast paints or stuff like that are absolutely usable. And what I'm going to do is test the effect of tinting on the palette, and the palette's super relevant because it's done with the same paints and the same techniques as the model that I'm ultimately going to be using this stuff on. After the issues I had last time with this, which involved me basically covering the desk, my feet, my legs, and anything I could see, I'm going to give it a go out now as a tint. So I'm using it thin. I've got some glazed medium in there. Tested here. I definitely need to be careful about how thick it is on the model, but it is looking pretty cool. So I think what I'm going to try and do is just go for the most nuts aggressive color fade I can fit on the model, and I think that's probably going to be going from magenta, this is magenta I believe, yeah it's magenta, to probably a turquoise, which will be a mix of these two I imagine. So let's jump onto the model and let's cross our fingers. My model has been varnished. I'm going to go from deep purple blue at the back, I think. Let's give this a go. So I'm using them super thin. Now because I varnished this, it's actually going to make the surface a little less porous and absorbent, and that's gonna encourage beading. So just patience. And I'll do it enough to build up some proper depth and get those colours looking funky. Okay, so you will have seen me completely screw that up on camera. I didn't do what I said that everyone needs to do. If you are doing this with an airbrush, which is put down a thin layer first, you need to do this with a brush as well. You know, going over, it's kind of a catch-22 situation. Putting the varnish down means that if I screw up, I can fix it, but putting the varnish down means that I am more likely to get the beading. So do put down a thin layer, even if it looks like you've done literally nothing with a brush or with the airbrush. Put down a thin layer first, let it dry, another thin layer, and build it up. And be patient, unlike me, but because I planned on my lack of patience, we got to fix that. We are done. That looks pretty insane. There is a load of scope for this technique. You could try it out, you know, any way you wanted. I might have obscured a little bit too much detail there, but you know, first time trying out those inks, they are potent. They really are potent. I knew they would be, but yeah, they've worked really well. More transparency in there, which is the glaze medium that I used, that could have made a difference. You know, just dialing it back a bit. I didn't have to go as deep with the colors. The color that I started underneath the silver, you know, just how bright the silver was. If there's anything that I can take away from this, it's that if you are going to tint it over the top, you can go really, really, really extreme in terms of everything, but especially contrast with your base coat. So do not worry if you look at it and you're like, you know, that's a bit harsh, even if it is pretty much black versus white, with not too much of a fade in between them. Once you've coated it with some, you know, vibrant multicolored stuff that's going to pull the eye, you can take it in so many different ways. So this has been, that was slightly thinner in terms of the coverage of it. There was more water in there. I put in some more alcohol or airbrush thinner. So that's got a really crazy marbled effect. A load of the ones on my palette before I started turning it multicolored, be careful this doesn't drip everywhere, they were quite good for camo. So this one here in particular, brilliant snow camo, and that would look amazing. But if you did it with multiple layers, you could use it for any type of camo. So that is the technique. If any of you have any suggestions on, you know, how to use a varnish with this technique or anything like that, I finished this off with some Monitorum varnish. Different applications. Is there, you know, a hybrid between this wet on wet technique using stippling? Please let me know your thoughts, your opinions, your questions. If you have a cool idea for the application of this technique, Imperial Night would be pretty sick, I think. Yeah, let me know below. I hope you've liked the video, and do feel free to take this and experiment with it whatever way you like, and please share your results with us. Do feel free to experiment. I'm super pleased with those results. I'm gonna catch you in the next video.